First start on a professional level. Frank, author, freelance writer, also all range of topics as you're going to learn. I first met Frank through the Star Tribune, and I was fortunate to have Frank write for the Outdoors Weekend section when we still had one at the Star. Immediately raised the level, the quality of the content, and just really inspired by Frank's work. Well, lo and behold, flipping through the Rotary magazine, the one that you all get each month as members of Rotary International, there's Frank's byline. And then there's another byline from Frank. And now realizing, and then in talking with Frank, just a regular contributor, and maybe one of the most, in addition to being a regular contributor, certainly driving a lot of response, touching on things around culture, language, travel, that are really that hit people, and they want to, as the way good writing can and good topics can. But I'm going to read a little bit more and let Frank get into his topic today. This is from part of the preface and intro to Frank's new book, The Shape of the World Essays, which certainly touch on his Rotary experiences. This is from a former managing editor of Rotary magazine, Jenny Lakmani. And I'll just read a portion of it. The first piece I ever read by Frank Bures was an article titled "How to Use a Squat Toilet." A colleague emailed me a link with a note that went something like, "You've got to read this. I've been immersing myself in all things toilet related. I just edited a feature on the topic for the Rotarian magazine, and I was electrified by Frank's piece. It was informative, hilarious, and a bit shocking." I sent him a note. Frank had written to us after seeing the Rotary logo painted on a truck in Mali, but if he thought it strange that the Rotarian magazine would respond primarily thanks to his article about the logistics of going to the loo, he never let on. It was the beginning of a beautiful friendship between Frank and me, between Frank and Rotarians. Although I've never counted, I'm willing to bet that over the years, his columns have received more responses from readers than any writer in the magazine's history. And so I'll leave it at that, Frank. That feels like a good... Frank Bures.
No, you're all wondering how to use a squat toilet, right? Yeah, you can Google it. I can send you the link too. Well, thank you, Bob. Bob is a great editor, one of my favorites to work with, and it's been really fun working on stuff with him at the Star Tribune, and thank you guys all for having me here today. I'm going to talk about the topic of the talk is the good enough life, and it's based on a couple of columns that I did for the magazine, where I was able to kind of explore some ethical questions, and they're all those columns are collected in this anthology of like 50 columns that I wrote for the magazine, and afterwards I'll have a couple for sale and back if anybody's interested. But it's been a great opportunity writing for the magazine, doing the columns on the one hand, where I get to kind of explore these questions, and then on the other hand, writing sort of more regular articles for the magazine. I think I've done over 200 pieces for the magazine over the years. So this is my sort of like, these are some of the questions that I've been wrestling with over time. So one day I was driving down the road with my family, and our car slowed down. Out of the corner of my eye, we came to a stoplight, and in the middle of the street was a guy with a sign that said he was homeless and needed help. And my wife and two daughters were in the car, and I just looked straight ahead, and from behind me, my 8-year-old daughter at the time said, "Can we give him some money?" And I didn't really answer, and the light turned green, and I drove on. And then after we left, the voice spoke again. She said, "Why are you so mean, Daddy?" And then my wife chimed in too, "Yeah, why are you so mean?" And she was sort of joking, sort of not joking. And then my daughter continued. She's kind of like this. Um, how would you feel if you were a poor person and all you had was scraggly clothes and people just drove past you? And I said, I don't know, and honestly, like I didn't know how it would feel, let alone how that guy felt. Because the fact is I hadn't really thought about that sort of thing for some time. Um, I mean, when I was younger, I thought about those things kind of all the time. And I was a member of all kinds of groups, and in college, I did a project about homelessness where I played a homeless person in a movie. And the first class I took in college was a history of India structured around the life of Gandhi. And, I wanted to be a good person, or at least a better person. And I wanted to leave the world a better place. I wanted to do no harm. I wanted to live a good life, or ethical life, or one that I could be proud of when it was all over. But, what is the right thing to do? Ever since Aristotle, people have been trying to create ethical systems that would tell you. John Stuart Mill thought that the right thing to do was whatever contributed the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. And more recently, thinkers are parsing like evolutionary research to figure out how we should behave, or how we can behave. But at the time, I thought Gandhi must have something to offer on the topic because, after all, using nonviolence, he defeated British colonialism and developed this philosophy that revolved around satyagraha, or soul force, and ahimsa, or doing no harm. And for him, things seemed clear, like he knew what was right and he knew what was wrong. He knew what to fight for and how to do it. And he lived according to his principles. And I wanted to live like that too. Gandhi was known as Mahatma, which means great soul. And I wanted my soul to be great as well. So on our first day of class, a pretty girl with brown eyes and red hair sat next to me. She wrote her name on the seating chart. It was Bridget. She'd grown up in a town not far from mine, and we knew some of the same people. And within a few weeks, we were dating, and we never ran out of things to talk about. We laughed a lot, and she would study to become a social worker, and she was also concerned about leaving the world a little better off. And as our class went on, I fell deeper in love both with her and with Gandhi. And, I got involved with Amnesty International. I would stay up late neglecting my homework because there were still more letters to write on behalf of political prisoners. I joined environmental groups, and I dreamed about going off the grid and radical simplicity and zero impact. And instead of a drinking glass, I used an old soda can because I was still perfectly good and I couldn't think of any reason to throw it away. And I just had no idea where to draw the lines. And I gradually kind of grew more aesthetic and extreme. But, Bridget, on the other hand, had a more nuanced idea of what it meant to be a good person, or to live a good life. And she was reading the same books about Gandhi and respected what he'd done. And she even believed a certain amount in ahimsa. But she could also see how while Gandhi preached kindness, he was also an autocratic father and husband. And for her, living a good life meant striking a balance between the causes you believe in and the people you love, between the world and your home, between your ideals and your community. And balancing your own needs with the needs of those around you is obviously one of the constants in life. And it doesn't stop when you walk through the door of your Rotary Club either. Don't get me wrong, Rotarians are good people. Are some of the best people. After all, that's the whole point of Rotary, is to, work together to make the world a little better. But that doesn't mean Rotarians, I don't know about your club, but in some clubs, doesn't mean Rotarians always see eye to eye about how to make that happen. And sometimes those conflicts can balloon into outright conflict. And that's what happened to one Rotarian who I interviewed for a column. Her name is Jean Best, and she nearly resigned from Rotary altogether because of conflict in her club. And obviously, Rotary clubs aren't the only place where conflict occurs these days. We live in the age of rage, kind of road rage, air rage, bike rage, office rage, quarantine rage. Online, we have Twitter fights and Facebook unfriendings and next door knockdowns, LinkedIn lashings. I kind of made up the last one, but I'm pretty sure that happens. But there's actually a whole field of study that's dedicated to systematically learning how to ratchet down disagreements and how to help everyone be happy with less than what they originally wanted. And it's from this field of conflict resolution that Jean Best came up with some techniques and a program, a 4-seminar program that helps kind of Rotary clubs keep moving along smoothly and openly. And one of the phrases that she uses is get curious before you get furious. In other words, ask somebody, why did you say that? Or why did you do that? And it's about kind of like opening the conversation and saying, tell me why you feel like this, or tell me what's upset you. And in her program, you sort of repeat back what someone else said to you, and then they clarify if that's what they really meant. And so there's no misunderstandings about what you're talking about. And in the system, ideally, once a conflict is kind of out in the open, all the parties offer ideas for a resolution, and then the initial party chooses the first step, and then other people choose the next steps, and then everybody kind of has a stake in the solution and the outcome. And it's essentially learning to see things from another person's perspective. And I've come to believe that is the key to many things in life, including a good life, leading a good life, and also successful Rotary projects. I did a story for Rotary magazine about this exact topic, where specific to international projects, where of what makes them actually work and successful. And one of the examples was I went to Kenya and talked to Gita Manek, was the district governor there, and she told me about a project where a U.S. Rotary Club from a friendly district, they volunteered in one of the slums around Nairobi, and could see that people didn't have showers and toilets and stuff, and so they came home, raised $2,000 to build one of each, or build two of each of those in this slum where they volunteered. And then, but then when one of the club members came back to Kenya to check on the project, they found that they were just sitting unused, and there were no handles, and it wasn't hooked up and everything. And so Gita got a exasperated call to go check it out, and she's found that the knobs were not on the toilets and showers because they would have been stolen, and there's no money for connecting the water to the main line, and no place to get rid of the water once it was used. And she said the problem was that a feasibility study wasn't done. Nobody had gone and checked out, what are we going to do before and after the project. But I kind of think the bigger problem was that no one asked the people in the slum what they needed. And there's this growing realization that what makes for a successful international project, it really boils down to one thing. It's asking people what they need instead of telling them. It means treating them like partners, and it means, because unless a part of the world intimately, the chance of you knowing how to solve the problems there are pretty small. And so the solution is to just ask, approach projects with more questions than answers. Ask the people in the community what their community needs, then ask what they think is the best way to fix that. and then ask, obviously, if the project will accomplish that. And over the years, I've come to think that this ability, or more accurately, the skill of seeing things from other people's perspective is, as my daughter alluded in the backseat, one of the key kind of pieces of being a good person. And it's actually also one of the core attributes of what's known as wisdom. There isn't really like a set criteria or a super agreed upon definition of what makes wisdom, but some of the qualities that do get included in under that umbrella are things like, recognizing the limits of your own knowledge, or seeking compromise, regulating your emotions, understanding that change is inevitable, and obviously, again, being able to see other people's perspectives. But however you define wisdom, contrary to popular belief, it's not something that you either sort of have or don't have. I talked to, for a column on this, I talked to a researcher named Igor Grossman who said that, what we all have some distribution of wisdom from one situation to the next, and there's a lot of variability. So you can be extremely wise in one situation and then go to another situation and be extremely unwise. And so that's kind of, in a way, the bad news, that there's no free ride on the wisdom train. It's not like something you just sort of get. But the good news is that Grossman and others found a couple ways to increase wise reasoning in a given situation. And there's a few different strategies, one of which is to imagine explaining a situation to an imaginary 12-year-old. Kind of simplifies it. Another is to visualize yourself from a bird's eye view. And another one that I like a lot is to refer to yourself out loud in third person before you make an important decision. So instead of saying, "What would I do?" I would say, what would Frank do? Or what would Frank Bures do? And according to Grossman, these strategies kind of make people less self-centered. And they are proven effective for increasing situational wisdom. So, after I talked to him, I actually tried the third person thing, and it felt a little strange at first, but it didn't feel quite as egomaniacal as I thought it would. And actually, when I did it, my thinking did feel a little bit cooler and a little clearer and a little more removed. And I was surprised at how powerful the shift was. It felt almost like I was kind of watching the person that I wanted to be. And it also made me like less afraid of things not going my way, and more open to whatever might unfold. And, it became kind of easier to see things from other people's point of view. But obviously, when I was in college, I didn't know about any of these techniques. And I remember one day I was sitting in my dark dorm room. I didn't have the lights on because I didn't want to use electricity, and there was plenty of light from the window. And I was bundled up in my fair trade Guatemalan sweater, reading a Noam Chomsky book and tinkering with my solar panel that I'd recently bought. And Bridget came over to kind of discuss how things were going. And I don't really remember a lot of the conversation, but the one thing I do remember was the line, "I'm not going to marry Gandhi." And at the time, I wasn't really thinking about getting married, but the word sort of penetrated my moralistic fog, and I was kind of being offered a choice of a life with her or a life alone with my principles. And it was my first glimpse of the notion that selflessness can be a kind of selfishness, and morality can also be a kind of narcissism. And it was also one of the first inklings I had that maybe being a good person wasn't quite as simple as Gandhi made it seem. Because how do you balance what you owe the world with what you owe the people around you? It's a question we all have to ask at some point in our lives, and there's never really a clear answer. And in a way, it's a version of the classical ethical dilemma of, is it better to steal food for your family or to let them starve? Most of us would say probably steal the food. But instead of food, Bridget and I were talking about love. We were talking about time. We were talking about attention. We were talking about life. How much of your life do you owe your family and friends? And how much do you owe the greater good? Arthur Kleinman is a medical anthropologist who wrote a book about exactly this issue. It's a stories of people who are caught between their ethical aspirations and on the one hand, and society's moral reality on the other hand. And he said that often the values that we aspire to are at odds with the world that we live in. His book is called What Really Matters: Living a Moral Life Amidst Uncertainty and Danger. And he told me that the stories in his book show how, we live in a world that is very practical, very uncertain, and sometimes dangerous. And in that setting, we make moral compromises. And he said the ethics is often taught as a black and white choice, wherein the world we live in is always gray. And in this gray world, our ethical choices are always some kind of trade-off. And that was something I just started to kind of appreciate after that conversation in my dorm room. And after that, leading a good life didn't seem so simple. And I started asking myself, good to whom and good for what? And I started to see that there were many ways of being a good person and that I was not being good to Bridget. And I kept that solar panel for a long time, but I never really figured out how to use it. These days I recycle and compost and buy renewable energy credits. But instead of writing letters, I write stories. And, while I know these are a far cry from leading the Salt March or defeating an empire through nonviolence, after more than 30 years with Bridget, I also know that it's one of the best trades I ever made. Thank you. I can take questions if anybody has them.
Any questions, Rotarians, before I have one, but anybody got a question for Frank? Frank, I'm wondering, thank you, first of all, for that on behalf of our club. I'm sure we all feel the same way. What are you working on right now for the magazine? Anything worth mentioning we should look for?
Is this on? Yeah. The most recent piece I had on was, or I had out was about a group in Minneapolis that is Tom Gump and some other people over on the western side of the Twin Cities are doing this Afghan Rotary Community Corps, where they every 2 Sundays, I think, or maybe it's every Sunday, they meet. And there's a lot of Afghan refugees coming to Minnesota right now, and they, a lot of them don't have English and need a lot of services and stuff, and they don't really know how to negotiate the thing. And so all the systems and stuff. So it's become a really key connecting point for new immigrants from Afghanistan with like services in Minnesota and trying to get people on their feet, because it's an interesting model because it's not a Rotary club. It's kind of they're designed as a kind of bridge between the community and the Rotary club. So it's some of each working together, and so
kind of soften the.
Yeah. It's really needed. And there's, I think, some similar things going on for Ukrainian refugees too.
Yeah.
And immigrants coming from Ukraine. Yeah. And then I have a couple column ideas that I've been pitching, and just heard about another project that's interesting in Haiti, where they have some gardens and like a farm that's doing really well, even in spite of the kind of government collapse in Haiti. And so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
the way these things, and we certainly have these stories over time, people visiting whether through programs or just projects we're doing, of these little gems that have emerged despite, like you're saying, despite all the
Yeah.
barriers, right? And
Or
that,
even one of the stories I did recently, there's kind of one of my favorite stories was about another similar group that's helping businesses on Lake Street that were destroyed and that are mostly immigrant owned,
I recall that.
to kind of rebuild and give business skills and stuff like that, or whatever people need to kind of get back up and running. So that was really, really interesting and fun story.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask, and I think there was a question online too. So your new book did this come out late
Yes.
fall, correct?
Yeah, exactly. This just came out in October, I think. September, October, something like that. Yeah.
Right. So certainly context. I mean, you've had a lot of experiences, certainly like you talked about today.
Yeah.
Experiences that have touched Rotary or make it into the book too. And
yeah, it's a lot of similar topics I think that's one of the reasons why I wrote for Rotary, have written for Rotary for so long. It's, over 10 years now. And I write about a lot of similar things that Rotary is concerned with. I was an exchange student, and cultural exchange is a big thing for me, and travel and cultural differences and the power of kind of stories and development issues and things like that are all things that I'm interested in. And so there's a lot of overlap, and I kind of get a lot of that stuff. So,
yeah. Well, I know you brought some books. We'll also circulate ways to find it. People certainly can find it on their own too online, but
all right. Well,
okay. On behalf of